Ahead of the Ukraine war completing 1 year, Russian President Vladimir Putin delivered his annual State of the Nation address today. The main focus of the speech was on the war. The impact of sanctions on Russian economy also came up, and of course, very strong criticism of the US and NATO.
Те, кто планировали новую атаку на Донецк, на Донбасс, на Луганск, четко понимали, что следующая цель.
The Russian president launched an all-out attack on the West, blaming it for the escalation of the Ukraine conflict. He said the West has put the very existence of the Russian Federation at risk.
Элиты Запада не скрывают своей цели – нанести России, как они говорят, это прямая речь, стратегическое поражение России. Что это значит? Для нас что это такое? Это значит покончить с нами раз и навсегда. То есть они намерены перевести локальный конфликт в фазу глобального противостояния.
Putin lashed out at the West for what he called their dictation of values. He also called out their superiority complex and looking down on other people. Putin lashed out at the West also for their sanctions on Russia, saying the sanctions have failed and are hurting their own economies.
Как я уже сказал, Запад развернул против нас не только военный, информационный, но и экономический фронт. Но нигде ничего не добился и не добьется. Более того, инициаторы санкций наказывают сами себя. Спровоцировали в собственных странах рост цен, потерю рабочих мест, закрытие предприятий, энергетический кризис. А своим гражданам...
Putin also announced Moscow's suspension of its participation in the New START Treaty, which was the last remaining arms control treaty between the world's two main nuclear powers, Russia and the United States.
Вынужден заявить сегодня о том, что Россия приостанавливает свое участие в договоре о стратегических наступательных вооружениях.
Meanwhile, the US has described Putin's accusations that Russia had been threatened by the West as absurdity. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said nobody is attacking Russia. Well, so unsurprisingly there, a trenchant attack by Russian President Vladimir Putin on the West, particularly on the United States, on the eve of the first anniversary of the Russia-Ukraine war. Significantly, Putin's State of the Nation address comes a day after US President Joe Biden visited the Ukrainian capital of Kiev, met with President Zelensky and reassured him of America's continued and uninterrupted support to Ukraine in this ongoing war, both in terms of financial assistance and military aid. For more on this story, we're now joined by our correspondent Anas Malik from Ukraine. Anas, no surprises there really as far as Putin's speech is concerned. A strong attack on the West, particularly the United States, squarely blaming NATO for the war in Ukraine and for escalating the conflict. But what is significant is that he's gone a step further and actually, in a sense, ended the new treaty. What should be made of some of the strong statements that have been made by Putin today, exactly a day after President Biden's visit to Kiev?
Well, you rightly mentioned there, Neha, no surprises. It was pretty much along the lines, but I think the bigger surprise was President Putin going out of the treaty, the weapons control, the arms control treaty. I think that is what is going to be the highlight of his address, of his almost 2-hour-long address, where he, as along expected lines, was blaming the West for his what he says was a preemptive action against Ukraine. Now, Kyiv, here where I am, it is closely monitoring the development. The last bit would of course be seen as an escalation, and now would be the time for diplomacy to get active. By and large, Kyiv would also be monitoring as to what President Biden has to say in a short while from now, as he is in their neighbors, that is in Poland, in Warsaw. He is to make an address in a while from now. So as to what President Biden has to say over there would also be very closely monitored. But a genuine cause of concern or a matter of concern on the part of Kyiv, and not just Kyiv, in London, in Brussels, in Washington, or even in New York as well, with the announcement by President Putin pulling out of that treaty, pulling out of that understanding. Now is the time for diplomacy to get active. We've seen lots of visits taking place. Even today, the Italian Prime Minister, she is here in Kyiv. She is to hold meetings with President Zelensky. We saw her earlier this morning, just passing by. So now is the time, with that announcement by President Putin, now would be the time for diplomats and diplomacy to get more active, so that some sort of an conclusion or a preemptive understanding could be made, so that in order to prevent more losses of human lives, especially civilian lives. Neha?
All right, Anas, thanks very much for getting us all those details on that big and developing story. Of course, all eyes will be now on President Biden, who is going to, in fact, make an address in Poland later today. Thanks very much, Anas, for that.